Hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of Schiz and Giggles. My name's Kody. I live with schizophrenia.
My name's Kit, and I live with schizoaffective disorder.
And we have an interesting topic today. Our last episode we did was about relationships. So we talked about romantic relationships, we talked about friends and family members. And at the end of the episode, we talked a little bit about caregivers, which kind of gave us the idea for this episode. We want to go more in depth about how our illnesses have affected other people in our lives, but also how it could have led to some trauma for people in our lives as well. I think this conversation is going to be a little intense. It's not going to be quite as, fun as some of our other conversations, but it is important to acknowledge that the caregivers in our lives also didn't ever expect that they would be going through navigating this illness or this diagnosis. So this is another episode kind of shouting out caregivers in our lives. And of course, we're still going to, talk about our experiences and what it looks like from our end. But the people in our lives who go through this with us, they experience a lot. And so we wanted to acknowledge that and try to, have a little conversation around that topic. So Kit, I'll kind of start with you because this topic was really your idea. And I think you wanted to go more in depth about how this affects the people around us and affects our loved ones. So I'll let you get started. What do you think is the most important takeaway from this?
It's so hard because what I've been through when it comes to my schizoaffective disorder has been traumatizing to myself.
Yeah.
But it wasn't till I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember whose podcast it was, but they talked about how their mental illnesses had traumatized other people. And I then went out of my own experience and I thought about the people in my life and what I've put them through over the years, all the way from when I was 14 to now being 30. And what have I done to them? Because I feel like I went through most of my illness thinking that it was me all the time, what I was going through, what I was dealing with, but I didn't think about how it affected other people until I was listening to that podcast. And so I thought about it a lot since then. And I think the most important takeaway from it is to just accept that it's probably going to happen. There's going to be some effect on the people you love. There's going to be some effect on your caregivers. And you deal with it and it's okay. It's all right. It's just part of the thing. It doesn't mean that it's something that you have to sit there and approve of per se, but it's a good thing to accept and acknowledge.
I think, and you said at the beginning of that, your illness traumatized you as well. And I think one thing that I struggled with early on was I was so focused on what I had been through, because not only had I been through a mental illness diagnosis, I went through addiction. I went through, time in jail because of my addiction and mental illness. I had a lot of unfortunate run-ins with law enforcement. I had a lot of trauma built up around this diagnosis. Time in jail was really scary for me, and it led to a lot of issues for my healing process. And so, like you said, I was so focused on how it affected me. And I just also want to acknowledge that both things can be true, right? I want people who are patients that are listening to remember that, yes, your experience can be traumatizing. It can be really scary. And that is true regardless of what we're saying here today. We just want to create this conversation around acknowledging what our loved ones had been through. And even though we didn't choose to put them through it, they still went through it with us, right? And so I also, as we talk about this, I want to remind you guys, I have a unique perspective where I also have been a caregiver. And early on in my experience being a caregiver with my mom, long before I experienced my own symptoms, I was a kid taking care of a parent, and I had a lot of resentment and a lot of anger. And I didn't understand that, she didn't want to be putting me through this as a kid. She didn't want me to have to take care of her or help her navigate life. No parent wants that. No one struggling with an illness wants that. So I'm kind of someone who has been on both sides, and I've seen not only how my journey has probably traumatized people in my life, but also how, being someone who cares for someone with this illness can be really scary. And there's a lot of things we don't know, and we're in this journey with them, and we're all doing this for the first time. So that's mostly what I want to acknowledge, is that both things can and are true. You go through this, your own experience, you go through the trauma that you're dealing with, but once you get, I think, more through your journey, I think that's when you need to start acknowledging what others have done to help you and what others around you have gone through, because that's something that you might not realize until you're well into your recovery journey. For me, it wasn't until pretty recently into my advocacy journey that I was able to really acknowledge the journey my mom took as a caregiver, or my wife. So I'd love to hear your perspective, Kit, on I was going to ask who you think has been the most affected or traumatized. I'm assuming it's going to be your dad. And so, like, kind of talk about what you realized on this journey of, like, acknowledging and understanding, and how you think that affected him over the time.
So I have two big examples of this because I've done so much thinking on all of this, of course. And the first one will be a very specific example. So many of you all know that I struggle with self-injury, and it used to be pretty bad. And it would be sometimes so bad that I would wake my dad up in the middle of the night and have him help me take care of it. And so during those times, I would usually say, Dad, I F-bombed up. And that was just what I would wake him up saying. And so to this day, if I say that phrase, and I can't say that phrase anymore, but there's been a few times where I've said it, and it's immediately caused him to think that I did that again. And I have to acknowledge that that is a form of trauma, 100%, because being woken up in the middle of the night with your daughter saying bad things have happened again, that's really scary from a parent's perspective. And so that's a very specific example of how it's affected him. But I would say overall, my episodes follow a go all the way up and feel really good, then go all the way down and be very depressed. And the higher the up, the lower the down. That's how it's always been. And so my dad, when he realizes I'm on an up, he dreads the down because he knows the down is coming. And so when I'm doing well and doing a lot of things, he's just dreading the down. And I know that's a thing that he has to struggle with and deal with every single time I have an episode. And I just know he has a lot of feelings about it. I remember talking to him once about my psychotic break that I had in New York City, and how so often he told me that he thought about just driving up there and then just taking me home because of everything I was going through. And he was just so scared for me. And while I am in a better place now, I have to acknowledge that the constant up and down cycle I was experiencing for years and years where I was properly medicated, it took him on a roller coaster. And I have to acknowledge that roller coaster happened, because if I don't, that's just invalidating his experience. But he's been there with me the whole time, and I know I put him through HD double hockey sticks as a result.
I also have a few examples, and so I'm going to use, some examples with my wife first, because my mom, she was still pretty early in her own recovery journey when I was going through my diagnosis. So the worst of my diagnosis, she couldn't be there for a lot of it because she was still healing and recovering herself. So Allison, like I said, she had to become a caregiver at a very young age. And I'm grateful she stuck around and helped me out, but she watched me go, from a high functioning person who was going to school and doing all this stuff and working, and suddenly I was having hallucinations and I was paranoid, and so the two things that I think are really traumatizing for her. The first example I think of is for a brief time would have episodes so severe that I would almost black out, and a really scary example of this was, I came home one night, Allison was looking for me, and I live in Wisconsin, and it was the dead of winter, and for whatever reason, I had like a blackout moment where I left the house, no shoes, no shirt, wandering around in the dead of
Oh
winter,
my God.
and I don't remember it. Like, to this day, I don't remember leaving. I don't remember going anywhere. It wasn't a sleep thing. Like, I was having such severe symptoms
Wow.
that I essentially just left the house. And fortunately, nothing bad happened. But this was where Allison got so nervous because anything could have happened. You know, if I would have had in if I would have had an issue with law enforcement, or if I would have, ended up walking into someone else's house or getting hurt or something like that, like anything could have happened. And to this day, if I'm having episodes, Allison gets really nervous that I'm gonna leave or walk out, or something terrible will happen. And so, that's one example where we've actually put Life 360 on my phone and
Yes.
my watch. And it's like, a lot of people don't understand. They're like, you really want someone to be able to track you out? I'm like, yes, I think Allison should be able to know where I am at all times.
No, I did it with my dad. My dad and I had
Yeah,
my 360. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, and sometimes it's like, I think that's the safer option, because let's say that I'm like somewhat coherent and I am able to message Allison. I travel a lot, so if I say, hey, I was wandering around, your example, New York City. If I was wandering out around New York City, I got to get back to my hotel and I'm not fully there. I need to be able to call her and be like, I need help getting back. And that has happened before, where I just start having symptoms out in public, and navigating it myself becomes really hard to do. So, like, that I think has been one of her biggest fear. And it got a lot worse because I started traveling. So, like, that was
Mm.
going on before I started doing advocacy. And then once I started traveling, she got and I think she has less of it now because I've been traveling for so long and nothing severe has happened, but it's something she thinks about all the time. Another thing that I want to acknowledge, it's not really a specific thing that is like a trauma event, but I think it points out how traumatic, like, the beginning of my psychosis was for Allison. And this is something I used to really hate. And I hear this from patients all the time. When your loved one or caregiver asks, did you take your meds?
Oh.
I used to get so annoyed, like, every single day. I'm like, if I said one thing, like, oh, I'm not feeling the best, or oh, I might be upset, or oh, I might be having symptoms, it was boom, did you take your meds? And that used to make me livid. And I hear this from other patients all the time. They're like, how do I get my parents to quit asking if I took my meds? And what I realized years later was, she asks that because she remembers what it was like before I had medication. And the idea of me not having access to my medication scares the shit out of her. Like, it scares her so much, because there's also, unfortunately, in the past been times where I just quit taking my meds. And fortunately, they were able to get me back on before anything severe happened. But this is something I realized, I thought was them being overprotective, or them not trusting me, or them not thinking that I could take care of myself. But what it really was it was her trauma of, like, having to relive what she went through when I was deep in psychosis and addiction recovery. So, one of the things I'm going to bring, I want to go back to you here. After I go back to you, I do want to talk also about the aspect of addiction, because where I also have a passive addiction, I have a lot of family members who have trauma revolving around that, which is a little bit harder to gain back trust from, because that's where I was probably a little more accountable. Like, I was doing things that directly harmed my loved ones, either, like, taking money from them, or like taking advantage of them so I could get access to use again. So there's that aspect too. But I kind of want to go back to you before I talk about that. So what I want to ask you is, like, how do you think our loved ones navigate this? Because I can speak a little bit as a caregiver. What do you think is something that, like, maybe we should have looked out for more with our loved ones and caregivers? What are signs of things they were doing that maybe we didn't recognize were them, trying to get through the trauma of what we were dealing with?
I think it comes across best as just them saying they're worried about me.
Yeah.
And I went through my psychotic break with people saying they were worried about me. And I came home and same thing, worry this, worry that type of thing. I did not realize that worry was just code for, holy crap, I want you to be better. Please just be better somehow, because I just can't handle you as you are right now. And it was kind of interesting because I had friends that were worried about me, and I had one that specifically thought that when I went to New York City, they did not think I was going to make it out alive. Like they
Oh, really?
yeah, they absolutely told me this later on. They were like, "No, I thought you were gonna, yeah, up there. Like there's no way you were coming back." And that was pretty wild to hear, and a little bit didn't like hearing that actually. But it still happened, and that's the thing, is it happened. And so the worry part really became clearer to me the more I recovered, because my dad saying he's worried about me is also him preparing for the worst, because that's what
Yeah.
he's used to. My mother, she's worried about me. Same thing, she's preparing for the worst. And other people in my life, it's like they when they say they're worried, it means they're bracing themselves for another episode, another event, another thing that can cause trauma if I'm not careful. And fortunately, now I'm recovered enough from my mental illness that it's not as bad anymore. Like I recently had an episode where I went up and then down, and had all that, and I don't think it caused anybody any issues that I know of, because I handled it in a way that was pretty constructive and um well done, in my opinion. But it's the worry part was a little bit of a clearer thing to me the more I thought about it.
Yeah.
And to this day, if someone says they're worried about me, I do take it very seriously, because I know there could be a feeling behind that. And so that's why I kind of stress the dialectic of you being with your mental illness and how it affects you, while also knowing that it affects other negatively as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mentioned I wanted to talk about the addiction aspect of my
Yeah.
recovery too. And so the phrase "I'm worried about you" is something I heard constantly, because people like, that's also usually how people approach addicts, right? Family members approach you with, "Hey, I'm worried about you," because they don't want to alarm you. They don't want to be confrontational and say, "You're an addict, you need help." I realize that we do this with both people with mental illness and addicts. We're like, "Hey, we're worried about you. We want to know how we can help." This is the constructive way of doing this. But like you said, what it actually is they're bracing themselves for the absolute worst case scenario. So years later, my mom and wife told me that they would constantly, like, if I ever like disappeared, like back when I was using, if I like disappeared for a day or two, the fear was that I either wouldn't return or I'd end up in jail. And like that, they every day, my mom sat around waiting for a call, either that they found me or that I was in jail. And, eventually that, I did end up in jail. So that was something that directly, because of my mental illness and addiction, that's where I was. And, that's what I hear from caregivers when I'm at events. They're so afraid because their loved one is, either homeless or struggling with addiction, and they want to help and they don't know how. So the best thing they feel like they can do is ask, like, what can I do? And unfortunately, that's usually what I say, is like, let them know you're worried. Let them know that you are there if and when they're ready to receive care. Because that's what I realized, is in moments of clarity, or like once I was unwell enough and I realized like, I might need to talk to someone, I went to my mom and my wife, because they were the ones who were always there. And they constantly told me that. They're like, "Hey, if you ever want to talk, we're here. If you ever need help, we're here." And I got to a point where I realized, like, yeah, I need help. It wasn't the help I thought I was going to receive, but I was like, yeah, something's wrong. I need to talk to someone. And I knew that they were there. So I do know now that, the way that they were trying to communicate was, they were basically saying, you need to go somewhere. You need to talk to someone. You need medication. You need treatment. And I didn't know that. And I think saying, "We're here if you need us," was actually more productive, because the few times that someone said, "You're mentally ill," or "You're losing it," or "You're addicted to," like, I was so like, I pushed back on that. I'm like, "No, I'm fine." And the more people said that, the more they became like the enemy in my eyes. Like, they became the villain in my story by telling me that I'm unwell. And if I think I'm fine, I like, that just pushes me further away from those people and wanting to ask them for help. So it's really hard, because like, we know now, looking back, that they were just there to help us. They were just there to get care for us. But also, the harder part is like, I've really struggled accepting the fact that that was their way of saying, "I don't know how to help you." And like that was a lot of, I think, their breaking point. Like that, I know my mom has distinctly told me that was her point of like, I had to basically tell you that, I couldn't help you, but I'm here if you ever need me. And that's hard to hear. And especially when you're healing and you're in your own recovery, it's hard to like look back on that. So I always want to acknowledge that, as someone who's also been a caregiver, it's frustrating watching someone go through that without wanting to receive help or wanting to receive care. And I know that firsthand. But also, I don't think people realize in our position, we do not fully understand the severity of the situation. Like I didn't understand that I needed help. I thought everything was fine. So whether I was like actively talking to people who weren't there, or I was in a psychiatric facility, or I was in jail, like I actually didn't see anything wrong with it at the time. It wasn't until I got, sober and I got medicated that I recognized how bad things were. So for me, a lot of that, like reliving my trauma, came with acknowledging what they all went through.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to realize that what I went through was not just affecting me.
Yeah. So I think my question is, do you still, or did you at some point have guilt around this? Because I worked through it in counseling and therapy, but I had a lot of guilt about, being a mentally ill person. And, I had to constantly remind myself, like, even though I didn't choose it, I still have, apologized to friends and family. I've still acknowledged it, even though I can't change it and it wasn't my choice. I had a lot of guilt, and it took a long time to work through that. So I just kind of want to see if that's something you also experienced.
Guilt was probably more temporary
Yeah.
because I kind of just radically accepted that the whole thing happened. And then when I spoke to my dad about the things that had happened, like he was okay.
Mm-hmm.
He loves me still. And it's like he kind of accepted it too, in a way. And I did talk about it in therapy a little bit, but it wasn't really something that weighed on me too much because fortunately, the people that dealt with it the most were forgiving and kind. And I was grateful for that because it helped me feel a little bit better about the whole situation. But I'm still not happy that I can't say the phrase "Dad, I effed up" without him flashing back to really bad nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's difficult. It's difficult a lot. Do you still struggle with guilt today about it, or have you mostly processed it?
Uh, I would love to sit here and tell you that I've worked through it, because I'm I'm a mental health advocate, and I talk about my life all the time and my traumas and stuff. But it's still something I actively work through, and I think I think part of that is that, with my addiction, some of what I put my family through was very direct. Like there was times where I did like take money from my loved ones, or I would like, I would take advantage of them trying to care for me, just so I could get drugs. And so like there's a little more direct, I think, responsibility that I had to deal with. And even though to this day I firmly believe that my addiction was a result of my schizophrenia, I don't think that forgives it. And so I deal with a lot of guilt, and I don't feel like I can ever make that up to my mom and my wife. And so it's not just them. It's, my grandpa, who recently passed away. I was really glad I got to, reconnect with him before he passed, and build a better relationship with him. But he was someone too that, he borrowed me money a lot. I never paid him back, and I took advantage of him trying to help me. And so there was a lot of scenarios where I directly impacted the lives of the people around me. And I was at a point where once I did realize how bad it was for them, I would have completely understood it if they didn't, want to be around me, or they didn't accept my apology. But all of them did, and for that I'm really grateful. And it's something that I wish I could say I'm completely worked through, but it's something I'm actively trying to recognize. And I don't know if it's something I'll ever completely get over. But that's, I think, more about like my relationship with, you know, the other aspects of my illness, like the addiction, the incarceration, stuff like that. That makes it a little bit harder, I think, because those are things that, you know, I can apologize for over and over, but they still happen, and so I can acknowledge them, but it doesn't make the guilt go away 100%. So maybe one day, but it's still a process, day by day.
Yeah, sometimes it takes things a while to deal with. I've definitely got my own set of things that I'm not quite over yet, and it's been years and years, and I think that's just the nature of mental illnesses and therapies, that things do stick around and they have to be reprocessed, and it takes time. So
Yeah. So, to any caregivers who are listening, I think we just wanted to make this episode to work through some of our own, conversations around this, because this is something that, as you can tell, Kit just asked me, "Do I still feel guilty?" And there's definitely still a bit there. It's something I struggle to talk about because I don't feel like it's my fault, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And that doesn't mean the people in my life didn't go through their own traumatic experiences. That doesn't mean that they didn't have to witness all of the things I went through. And so I know, as being a caregiver as well as a patient, how difficult it can be to watch your loved one go through those things, and how helpless it can feel at times. So we want to thank anyone out there who's listening, who is a caregiver, who is a loved one, who is working with someone who might be navigating recovery right now. We know it's hard, it's frustrating. And I also want to acknowledge that we understand that if they're early on in their diagnosis, they might not realize how much you've been through. They might not be able to acknowledge that for years into their recovery. But that's why we wanted to talk about it. So you guys know that, like, in the future, once they're better and they're getting through their recovery, they might be able to deal with that a little bit more. But it is a process, and it's something I'm still working through. I'm 10 years into my recovery journey now, so it's tough, and it's something like we have to navigate our own trauma, and then we also have to add on the acknowledgement of what everyone around us went through. So it can be a process. It can take time. So just be patient, and understand that, it's definitely a relevant conversation, but it might be something for the future to discuss. And so I know we're going to do more on this because we both want to bring in our loved ones at some point. So Kit plans on, having a conversation with her dad.
yes, my
I
dad.
would love to have, my wife on it sometime, my mom on it sometime. And those conversations, I think, will be able to really thoroughly describe what we just went through, and some of the things that, our loved ones dealt with, and how they navigate that trauma now too. So, Kit, do you have any final thoughts for the people before we wrap the episode up?
Yes, absolutely. If you guys have any topic ideas or guest ideas or anything else you want us to know, you can reach out to us on social media. We are on TikTok and we are on Instagram at Schiz and Giggles. That's Schiz like schizophrenia and all spelled out, and Giggles like, well, giggles. And if you don't want to reach out on social media, you can also email us at schizandgiggles@gmail.com. And while you're here, if you haven't already, like, rate the show, comment, let us know what you think.
All right. And as always, Kit,
Guys, remember, the brain is a minefield, and we brought flip-flops.